Hello, thanks for joining us on this week's episode of Wise Content Creates Wealth podcast. You've heard that content is king. Well, wise content rules the world. This podcast is about understanding how you can make and utilize wise content to improve your financial success and your company's bottom line. I am Joseph Franklin McElroy, and I'm a marketing technology expert who has built a multi-million-dollar company, and I'm also an award-winning content producer. My company is Galileo Tech Media, a leader in providing wise content for SEO, content marketing, and digital PR. Our wise content is content that incorporates semantic science, behavioral science, AI, and data to make marketing and promotional content that is smart, that converts better, and gets better rankings. Galileo helps companies achieve scale and effectiveness with their SEO and content marketing. Our agenda today is trust. I'll have today, a little bit later, my guest is Brandon L. Young, a senior consultant of Cyanet Group and an organizational psychologist. And he is an assessment scientist and researcher and also a pro MES facilitator. But first, a little story. Imagine you're headed to a jewelry store to purchase a Rolex watch. You're walking along. Maybe you can't really afford one, but just imagine on your way to the store, you see a man in the street. He sidles up to you, rolls up his sleeves, shows you his arm, and strapped with a watches up to his elbow. Hey man, want to buy a Rolex, he mutters. Unless you are temporarily insane, you won't bite. Why? Because you don't trust the guy. There's no way those Rolexes are real. This may seem a little bit odd example, but many digital marketers today are the equivalent of the watch salesman. They connect with a potential prospect through social media or email or from search engines and immediately begin pushing their products without taking any time to develop a relationship of trust. Trust is really important for selling online. Establishing that trust in your content is incredibly important. But not only is it important for selling, it's important for getting found in the first place. It's different than the world of the street in that regard. You can walk down the street and you can just stand there and be able to knock somebody up and say hello. But on the search engines, they actually are smart enough to figure out who's the sellers that should be standing along the street. Google, in fact, introduced an acronym to represent how it evaluates websites to give them positions in the search engines. And it's called EAT, E-A-T. E stands for expertise, which you have to demonstrate. Authority, you have to be an authority, is represented by multiple factors, and you have to be trustworthy. You have to be somebody that people trust. And if you don't establish that, you don't get ranked. The first two, expertise and authority, are really for how you get higher rankings. But trust, if you're not trusted, you don't get rankings at all. So it's really important. There's several factors, many factors that go into that, and some of that is behavioral, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But right now, I'm going to tell you that the fundamental things that you have to do. One is your reviews. If there's negative sentiment about your business, Google will figure it out. So you have to pay attention to the reviews you're getting from people on all the different places that you might get reviews. And this could be, if you're in travel, it might be TripAdvisor. There's others for other kinds of business. You can look at Trustpilot, of course, Facebook, Google My Business, multiple directories. And if you're operating in the United States, you better have good reviews on the Better Business Bureau site. And so you have to pay attention to those sentiments and address them and try to enhance your reputation. Also important is just the trustworthiness of your site. And there's a lot of technical aspects to that besides just the nature of the content. You have to have a clear way to make contact with the website owner. It's best if it can be associated with a physical location. While it's not impossible, it is a good, it increases trustworthiness if you can list an address. If you have a terms of service and a privacy policy on your page and accessible, and the footer is important. Making sure that you use a secure domain. It's HTTPS, or what's called an SL certificate. If your site is not using now HTTPS as its default protocol, then you are actually out of the game. And in fact, Google and Chrome browser is going to start giving, it started giving warnings to people saying this is not necessarily a trustworthy site. So if you're not doing it, you're going to eventually just totally lose the game. You should have, if you're accepting money, then you need to have a clear refunds and returns policy. You should, if you're selling products, you need to have comprehensive specifications of the product and any necessary safety advice. And in general, if you're sharing knowledge, it's a good idea to have an author biography included and to cite external sources where relevant. Linking out to authority sites is a good thing. So those are some of the technical aspects to make Google represent you as being trustworthy. But it's not only Google and the technical things, it's also content marketing. For most of your brand's content pieces, your goal will be create shareable content that your customers will pass out on their network. And it's an interesting statistic is that 9 out of 10 consumers want brands to share content online. And when we talk with branding, it's also interesting that that content from businesses are now as trusted as much, or if not more, than news media and the government. It's an interesting point in our society where people actually trusting businesses quite a deal. And when we talked with Brandon, there were some aspects of that I thought we could point out. But in order for content to be shared, it has to be considered trustworthy. So you just can't slap a logo on a corner and have a quote from one sort of source. You got to build trustworthy, shareable content, and it needs to reflect your brand. It means that it needs to address your customers' interests and values in an authentic way. You can't really lie to your customers and get away with it. The day of hiding things behind the brand no longer work. Brands are transparent now. And you have to understand that it's a pass-through. You're not going to hide anything. So you need your culture, and everything that you do needs to represent your brand. It's best if your content is inspirational and educational in order to be trusted. An interesting statistic is that while 58% of consumers will trust just plain editorial content, when it's inspirational or educational, it jumps to 74% will trust the content. Originality, don't be copying other people. There's right now, in this 1 minute I'm speaking, 347 WordPress blog posts were just published. What's going to make your stand out? Some things that I just learned, and I've been doing this for a while, is if you use stock photography, it reduces trust. Or if you use charts from other researchers, it reduces trust. You want to try and be original as you can. People will actually notice those shortcuts. And you will lose, one piece will lose 30% of its readership, can drive away 30% of readership of your whole blog if it's really has a lack of credibility. So you have to do this for every post. And then showing your sources, where you are getting your information is really important. It increases trust. And half of customers will say that trust is lost when there's no verifiable external sources. So another thing is if you can get people to share your content, that word of mouth creates more trust. So sharing itself, building content that's trustworthy, that causes people to share it, builds even more trust. And in fact, builds a lot of trust for your brand. So word of mouth trust is incredibly important. And then, so at the end of the day, before customers trust you, before they share you, they need to trust that you're a reputable source. And so you can, by incorporating these various trust signals, and there's more than what I just mentioned, there is a lot of behavioral stuff that can go into content to make it speak to the person. There's personalization. The world's coming where everybody will get a different piece of content, but it still has to be trustworthy to them individually. And that's going to take a lot of understanding of behavior and AI and data. But incorporating various trust signals into your content and staying true to your brand and your audience interests can create content where your customers trust enough to give the ultimate endorsement, sharing it with their network. So that brings me to our guest, Dr. Brandon L. Young. Brandon is an industrial organizational psychologist who partners with organizations to identify and build sustainable solutions to their most pressing behavioral businesses challenges. He makes teams and organizations smarter by measuring what matters and more productive through evidence-based assessments and feedback processes. Hello, Dr. Brandon.
Hello, thank you for having me.
It's good to, I read that article called Follow the Trust. Now, to full disclosure, Brandon works with a good friend of mine, Dr. Dave Popple, who's going to be on next week. And I've been talking to Dave about him being on the show for a different purpose, but he'd sent this blog post across the transom, and I read it, and I've been thinking about trust in the terms of what we do in marketing. And there were some points in that article I thought were really great. And I said, well, some of this could translate into what people could do to make content better. So, I think that we could talk about some of the aspects of that article and then see if we can find some applicability to a marketer trying to make their content more trustworthy. Sound like a good idea?
Absolutely. I think there's definitely some play there for people in the marketing world.
Yeah. So you talked about, well, we only have a minute here until the break. So why don't we just take the break now, and we'll come back and we'll talk about the state of trust in the United States.
Sounds great.
All right.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Are you a conscious co-creator? Are you on a quest to raise your vibration and your consciousness? I'm Sam Leibowitz, your conscious consultant, and on my show, The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, we will touch upon all these topics and more. Listen live at our new time on Thursdays at 12 noon Eastern Time. That's The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, Thursdays, 12 noon on talkradio.nyc.
Are you interested in having a better relationship with yourself, others, and God? Greetings. I'm your host, Dr. George Andow, for the show, A Journey Through into Awareness. On my show, we journey into the awareness that the mind of God is the true seat of our personal consciousness. We join together each Monday at 7 p.m., so tune in on Talk Radio NYC.
Did you know that nearly 1 in 5 adults in the U.S. battles mental illness? Hi, my name is Albert Daba. I'm the host of the show Extra Innings. Extra Innings, I discuss the topics of wellness, mental health, and the experience of surviving multiple suicides within my family. Listen live every Monday at 6 p.m. Eastern to Extra Innings for discussions with sports figures, artists, mental health professionals, and many others. That's Monday at 6 p.m. Eastern on talkradio.nyc.
Hi, I'm Graham Dobbin. Join me every Thursday evening for the Mind Behind Leadership here on talkradio.nyc. We speak to people from business, sport, military, and politics, all around what makes a great leader. the personal experiences of what's worked and maybe more importantly, what hasn't worked. So that's 7 o'clock every Thursday evening. The Mind Behind Leadership here on talkradio.nyc. Listen to real stories of real leaders.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC. Uplift, educate, empower.
Hi, this is Joseph Franklin McElroy back with the Wise Content Creates Wealth podcast with my guest, Dr. Brandon Young. So Brandon, I read your article about Follow the Trust, and in it you talked about the state of trust in the U.S. Can you expand upon what is the state of trust in the United States?
Yeah, first I just want to make a comment on one thing from the intro. So I can't think of a more New York analogy to trusting digital marketers than the Rolex person selling a Rolex on the street. Maybe the Louis Vuitton handbag salesperson as well. But I can't. That definitely speaks to New York when I heard that. So the state of trust in the U.S. Back to your question, you actually highlighted one of the points that from the Edelman Trust Index. They just put out their 2021 results, and they had about over 33,000 respondents from 28 different countries, and they look at trust across various institutions. So they look at businesses, governments, NGOs, and media. And the point that you highlighted was that business seems to be more trusted than any of those other institutions. Now, it's only 54% of the respondents who said that they trust businesses. So just keep that in context. That tells you how poorly the other institutions are trusted. But business was also the only one that was looked at as seen as both ethical and competent. So NGOs were seen as ethical. Think about Doctors Without Borders, World Wildlife Federation, those types of organizations. So they're seen as ethical, but not necessarily competent. And then governments and media are not seen as either. So the bright spot in this, nearly 75% of the U.S. respondents, at least, said that they could trust their own employers to do the right thing. So at least employees are trusting their leaders, the folks that employ them, the people they work for. And some of the top trust building activities or actions that they see from employers are things like guarding their information and making sure that they're guarding the information quality. So they feel like they're getting trustworthy information from their employers versus from media, from government, some of these other institutions. They also they feel like they're getting reliable information from their managers. And they think about the time we're living in right now, when everything shut down, people moved to remote workspaces. Other people who weren't able to do that had to trust that their employers were going to be mindful of their safety and that sort of thing. We're taking information from the correct places and sharing that in a trustworthy way. And so it's good that they at least can trust their employers to do the right thing, because really that's the most proximal relationship and probably the most important to their own personal safety and health.
So
but,
does that go to, I mean, in some ways we've become a lot more tribal and polarized. Is that related to that? I mean, how did we get here?
It could be in some ways. In other ways, I think, what we saw was that trust really eroded since May of 2020 in government and these other places. So perhaps
that recent. Wow.
That recent, there was a huge, deep fall since May. And then when we had the election, especially for Trump voters, that trust fell even further. And so I think it may be some of that tribal, but people are grasping for who can we trust in this environment. In some cases, it's not the media. Social media is the least trusted institution that we see. So there may be some tribalism, but it's also just like who's really treated me best here, maybe
Uh-huh.
out of these institutions. And I think managers really did step up their game in terms of communicating, being transparent, checking in, making sure employees were okay as they were working from home or as they were working on the front line. So in some ways, I think the things that managers and leaders should be doing all the time, they've had to really step up their game, and it's paying off in that trust world.
So, was there any indication about whether that was employees, did that extend to consumers as well? You know, people buying stuff?
It certainly, I think, shows up when employers and organizations are doing good things for the broader society or for their community. So you've seen, or you get good press about leaders who took a pay cut, or they didn't take any salary to make sure that they could pay employees, or Amazon has helped in terms of distributing goods to help in the pandemic efforts. So there are companies that have been doing those sorts of things all along, being socially responsible, having good corporate social responsibility. They cared about the climate. They do things like that. They display their philanthropic activities. But I think, but certainly in this environment, when there are a lot of people that are just in need and hurting, I think that some of those activities are really paying dividends. But they have to act first, not just say we're going to do these things. Act first, then talk about it.
Have to be authentic, like I said. Yeah.
Right.
So a lot of those companies you mentioned have pretty big name CEOs. How does trust in CEOs affect the trust in an organization?
The CEO really, I mean, they're often the face of the organization, right? Everybody knows who the CEO is. If you know of the company, you know the CEO, and anytime that they are involved in any sort of transgression, that obviously impacts the organization in a negative way. They're going to get negative publicity off of that. You may lose advertisements or advertising spots and consumers. Think about some of the organizations that we've seen in the news lately. It's often, maybe I'm not talking just the last year, but in the last 5 years, maybe it's often not necessarily because they're doing great things, right? It's because they've done something that violated trust. I just read an article about McKinsey, and the partners just recently voted out their top leader due to some blowback that they were receiving from their work with pharmaceutical companies because of the opioid crisis, projects that they've had with scandalous companies in South Africa that they were power providers in South Africa, also in their dealings with ICE, United States Immigration Enforcement. So, I mean, they had some blowback there, and the person who took the fall for that was the CEO. And it just seems like every month we have something like that, and it may not be that high profile, but there are all kinds of different there are all types of transgressions that could cause somebody to lose trust. And you see things like the Me Too movement and how high profile or high status, maybe not the CEO, but high status folks have been fired or forced to resign due to transgressions because people do not want that image or publicity for their firms.
So do you think that that's interesting? If there's a distrust at, say, the CEO level, would that translate into down at the micro level, somebody reading an article or reading a blog post, and whether they would trust the information on that if it was based upon a company with the CEO in a bad light, or even the company itself in a bad light?
Absolutely. And I think that the CEO is the kind of the flame or the torch bearer for the whole organization. So if the CEO is seen in a bad light, everybody else down the chain could be seen in a bad light, because they may not be holding other people up to the standards that they should be held up to. A glimmer of hope is that in that Edelman Trust Barometer, people were more likely to trust their own employer's CEO. So they trust their own business, they trust their own, it's very localized, their own CEOs. Mm-hmm. And some of that is due to some of the factors we were talking about, is that because there's a void with government and trust in government and media, employers have been asked to step up to take on some of those societal challenges, and employees respond to that, and employees follow that model of the CEO. And so consumers see that, that leads to more credibility in their character. We'll talk a little bit about the trust equation, and those are a couple of variables that go into that. And I think I'm going off on a tangent here, but
that's right.
Was I answering your question?
That is, yeah. No. So why do you think trust matters to organizations?
Well, it certainly matters in terms of their reputation, in terms of how they reach their consumers, but as we've been talking about, but it also influences how employees act, how they manage their customer service transactions, whether or not they're engaged in the workplace. You see higher retention rates when trust is high, and you just see high overall greater financial performance for organizations that are deemed more trustworthy. And obviously that's the goal for most organizations, is to have good financial outcomes.
So yeah, I wonder if the online world will start measuring things like, it's interesting. I bet you they could start measuring employee retention. They could start measuring those kind of signals to see if an organization is trustworthy, to determine whether the content is trustworthy, because they're doing some really interesting things in that regard. So organizational trustworthiness could have an impact about whether the blog post the marketer is writing will actually show up in the search engines, don't you think?
It absolutely could. I mean, trust is the foundation for everything that an organization puts out there. So it would influence how somebody might take a marketing approach, which could influence the credibility or the character behind what it is that you're doing. And if you're not building trust within your organizations, it's difficult to build trust outside of your organization.
Yeah, cool. So when we come back, we'll talk about that trust equation you just mentioned.
Okay, sounds good.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC. Uplift, educate, empower.
Hey everybody, it's Tommy D, the nonprofit sector connector, coming at you from my attic. Each week here on talkradio.nyc, I host a program, Philanthropy in Focus. Nonprofits impact us each and every day, and it's my focus to help them amplify their message and tell their story. Listen each week at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time until 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here on talkradio.nyc.
Are you a business owner? Do you want to be a business owner? Do you work with business owners? Hi, I'm Stephen Fry, your small and medium-sized business, or SMB guy, and I'm the host of the new show, Always Friday. While I love to have fun on my show, we take those Friday feelings of freedom and clarity to discuss popular topics on the minds of SMBs today. Please join me and my various special guests on Friday at 11 a.m. on talkradio.nyc.
Do you run or are ready to open your own business? Hi, I'm Jeremiah Fox. I've been operating and opening small business for the last 25 years, and I'm the host of the new show, The Entrepreneurial Web. Tune in every Friday at noon Eastern Time for insights and stories on the nuances of running small business, right here on Fridays at noon, talkradio.nyc.
Hi, I am Joseph Franklin McElroy, host of the new podcast, Wise Content Creates Wealth. It airs on talkradio.nyc every Friday afternoon from 1 p.m. to 2. They say content is king. Well, wise content rules the world. Every episode features tools and tips for content marketing and business people telling the wise content stories of that success. Tune in every Friday from 1 p.m. to 2 on talkradio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
is Joseph Franklin McElroy, back with the Wise Content Creates Wealth podcast with my guest, Brandon Young. So Brandon, the way I understand the Cyanet group essentially does for large corporations, helps identify the trustworthiness of employees for the positions they're going to fill, correct?
That's one of the things that we do. Yeah, so we can assess for that, sure.
So that sort of maps to the employee being their resume and them being the blog page or the product page, and then the big company being the consumer. And you have sort of this trust equation that you use, don't you? So tell me about that. There may be some ways to map that in a different way.
Yeah, absolutely. So of course, when you're a job candidate, you're trying to sell yourself. So you're marketing yourself with the resume or whatever it might be. And let me just ask you a question real quick, Joseph. What is an organization at its core?
What is it at its core? It's it depends upon where you're coming from, but it's a unique selling proposition. It's a mission statement and a community of people following that.
The community of people is what. Thank you for getting to that. So of course those other pieces are important, but it's people coming together and they're working toward something shared, right? A shared mission, shared vision, like you mentioned as well. And from the moment an employee engages with an organization, so even on that website before they submit their application, they're already making judgments about an organization. So you mentioned earlier that the website is important, right? And it lends to the credibility and trustworthiness of an organization. And so they're making judgments from the second they engage to the second they leave that organization, and they're making judgments or perceptions about certain things. And so with the trust equation, we talk about there are 4 variables in the trust equation. So there are 3 variables in the numerator, and those variables are capability, character, and cultural alignment. So people are making perceptions about these things, and they're multiplicative. So if any one of those is 0, that the perception of the capability is 0, the perception of character is 0, the perception of the cultural alignment is 0. What do you get if you multiply something times 0?
Right.
0, right?
Yeah.
All right, yeah. So when we're talking about capabilities, really when you're trusting others, it begins with trusting yourself and your capabilities, but it's not, it's being confident, which is a strength, but not overconfidence, which then becomes a weakness. So often what we see are people are promoted into managerial or leadership types of positions because they were really good at the technical capability part, but they may have never led anybody, or maybe they're not good at leading people, but they're good at that technical piece, so they're put in this leadership position. When they get that promotion, they feel a sense of validation. It often can lead to a sense of overconfidence in their ability to do other things like lead people. And when you have that overconfidence, you tend to have mistakes. And when you have mistakes or errors in judgment, you don't trust other people or bring them into the conversation. You don't build an advice culture. People start losing trust in you, if they had any trust in you in the first place. Often we see people get promoted and we say, I do not trust this person as a leader. They're very good at what they did, but I don't trust them in inspiring me and motivating me and getting this team to do the right things. The other piece of that is character. And so that's really a function of reliability, integrity, and intent. And so reliability comes from consistency between actions and words. You want people to be able to predict what you're going to do based on what you said, right? So if I set an expectation based on something I said, I should follow through on that. Integrity is about being honest, and it stems from having an alignment again between behavior and not just what you say you're going to do, but your stated ethics and values. And then that intent piece it refers to our motives. So what was the intent behind our motives? Do people see us in terms of in a good light and they feel like our intentions are good, or do they feel like they're self-serving? And then the last component in the numerator is that cultural alignment. And that really boils down to likability. And that definitely crosses over into that marketing world. How likable is the company? Some companies are less likable than others. And some companies just have certain communities or tribes, like we were talking about earlier. And so it's building that likability, that cultural alignment when you're talking about with the consumer, building some alignment with their interests and needs, right? The final piece of that equation is egocentrism. And that's the denominator, right? Yeah. And so somebody who's egocentric, they're looking at things from, how does this benefit me? It's very much personal focus versus the needs of others. Somebody who's more egocentric if they're constantly talking over or interrupting others. They're saying things like I and me versus we and us. And they generally don't focus on their commitments to others. I think we can see why trust in government is at a low here, because I can think of several people in our government right now that are very egocentric.
Right.
And so I'm not going to go into who those people are, but I think we all can picture those people.
Right.
And so when that's high, other people feel dismissed, they feel unheard, they don't feel cared about, and they don't feel like they have an advocate that they can trust. And so within an organization, that's important, but also when you're communicating externally to engage consumers, it's important to think about those things as well.
Well, I think that I think that we should write a blog post about this for a marketing blog, because this is actually it. This is the trust equation, in terms of, somebody comes to a piece of content, they got to be convinced of the capability and character and the cultural alignment of the company, essentially, in that content, right? And
Absolutely.
then they can't be overwhelmed by the company trying to sell itself, right?
Right.
If it's too much about buying the product right now, especially in the B2B space, right? Then the trust is going to go way down, right?
Absolutely.
I think this is a great equation, and this was why I said, I think this does have a lot of applications to developing marketing and content, is you have to be aware of that when you're writing the content, that you're expressing both the numerators and downplaying the cell or the denominator, right? That's
Absolutely.
great. Oh.
And I think we can, I don't want to jump the gun here on your questions, but I think we can all think of, marketing as an extension or there's an interplay with sales. And so people think of sales and marketing together quite often, right? And we all have that picture of that salesperson, that telemarketer, that used car salesman, that guy selling Rolexes, whoever it is. And we don't inherently trust sales and marketing.
Right.
HubSpot actually did a survey, and they found that only about 3% of people surveyed considered marketers and salespeople as trustworthy.
Only 3%?
Only 3%. That was less than professional musicians. We have to establish that credibility first. That's what we've been talking about. And
you got to make sure that the blog doesn't seem like it's written by the marketer. It has to be written by somebody that's authentic, the engineer or somebody like that, right?
Yeah. Somebody who has that expertise, or they're looked at as an expert or credible. And also, talking to people as if they're human, because they are human, right? Putting that authentic, making it authentic, putting a human face on the corporation.
What do you think that's the best way for an organization to earn consumer trust?
Absolutely. I think the trust equation, build that character, build that credibility and that likability piece. And so it's speaking to their needs. It's making them feel like they're getting some value before you try to sell them on something. I think that's the best way to build a following. And then at some point, as you build that following, when you establish that trust is when you're going to make that sale.
Okay, well, let's take it a little deeper now into the content and the marketing. You heard me talk about EAT, expertise, authority, and trust, and how it's important for SEO, and I think, frankly, for most content marketing. Did you happen to think about where EAT and this discussion and the trust equation might overlap?
Yeah, that expertise and authority piece is, that's credibility. That I think that that's the credibility, the character, and the cultural alignment or the likability factor. So I think the EA piece is that numerator in the trust equation. The trust is a broader concept to me. So you have to have those other two things. You have to establish those other two things before the trust comes. But you're establishing all three, right? So do we trust the ability of the marketer or the organization to deliver on the message? Right? They're trying to sell me this. Do I trust that they're going to be able to deliver on that? Are they lying to us? Are they making stuff up? People, in some ways, they're becoming better consumers of information. Millennials, for sure, they don't trust any advertisement. They don't. And maybe let me even ask you: when's the last time you clicked on a banner ad or bought something off of a television commercial?
Yeah, they don't. But yeah.
And so you have to establish that trust piece, because they just don't inherently trust that messenger who's coming through with that advertisement. And then the piece we've been talking about too is the other question you're asking is, does this messenger, does this company really want to help me, or do they just want to make a buck off of me, right? And so people look at the greater societal impact of organizations, and is this something that's helpful, or is it just to earn a buck? And again, if any of those things are zero, people aren't going to trust that marketing message. I buy, you buy, I'm sure most people buy from organizations they like and trust. And often that like and trust comes through communities of interest. If an organization can build up a community of interest that solicits feedback from their consumers, listens to it, actually posts replies when they get the feedback, if their friends are part of that community, you're more likely to trust that organization and buy from that organization over and over again.
So do you have any quick advice for content marketer from behavioral side to get people to engage with marketing content or an established trust?
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely not an expert in marketing, but some things that I've read or things that influence me are when especially if it's an organization that's very new to me, a slogan isn't going to do it, or a paragraph isn't going to do it. I need to be able to engage in some longer form content where they can establish the credibility and the character. And it also needs to be something that's of value to me, that's actually helpful to me. So maybe it's not even a blog, a white paper or a blog. Maybe it's just a tool or some sort of a questionnaire or something that helps me think through a problem. Infographics are nice because they're very digestible, but I love data. And so I can't remember the guy, I think it's Sam Baraka or something. He was the CEO of Sara Lee, and he had on his desk a plaque that said, in God we trust, all others bring data. So if I can see data and I can verify those data, those are the types of things that speak to me. If you think about longer content that you can actually engage with, I mean, think about when you search for something online, what's one of the websites that often comes up in a search engine? Wikipedia, right? Long form, more references like you were talking about earlier. It may not be the most credible, but at least there are references that you can check into down the line. They use a lot of references. So I think more of engaging in that community aspect and building those customer advocacy groups online with social media. Even though social media isn't overall that trusted, people do get involved in their echo chambers and they trust the people that they talk to and they believe in. So for good or bad, it's a good way to use social media.
Right.
Yeah. I don't know.
Cool. So we will be back in a minute. We will be talking about what to do if you really screw up your trust, and I will be talking to you about a tool to help you with your website trust.
Great.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC. Uplift, educate, empower.
Are you a small business trying to navigate the COVID-19 related employment laws? Hello, I'm Eric Sauver, employment law, business law attorney, and host of the new radio show, Employment Law Today. On my show, we'll have guests to discuss the common employment law challenges business owners are facing during these trying times. Tune in on Tuesday evenings from 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. Eastern Time on talkradio.nyc.
Howdy, I am Joseph Franklin McElroy, host of the new podcast, Gateway to the Smokies. It airs on talkradio.nyc every Tuesday night from 6 p.m. to 7. Every episode is dedicated to memorable experiences in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park and surrounding areas. This show features experts and locals who will expound upon the richness of culture, history, and adventure that awaits you in the Smokies. Tune in every Tuesday from 6 p.m. to 7 on talkradio.nyc.
Do you love or are you intrigued about New York City and its neighborhoods? I'm Jeff Goodman, host of Rediscovering New York, a weekly show that showcases New York's history and its extraordinary neighborhoods. Every Tuesday live at 7 p.m., we focus on a particular neighborhood and explore its history, its vibe, its feel, and its energy. Tune in live every Tuesday at 7 p.m. on talkradio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Hi, this is Joseph Franklin McElroy, back with the Wise Content Creates Wealth podcast with my guest, Brandon Young. So, Brandon, somebody puts out a commercial that inadvertently is offensive or does something like that and creates distrust for an organization. Or what are the ways they go about reestablishing trust?
Yeah, and I mean, that can cause huge issues, right? And it wasn't, the intent behind it wasn't to cause that kind of an issue, but people's perceptions of that intent is what's important, right? And so the first thing that organizations have to do is to really publicly admit to a mistake. That immediately improves one's credibility. May not prove it a lot because you need to follow that up. You need to take responsibility, and you need to outline some sort of a plan to protect in the future. So trust can be effectively restored, but people need to observe a consistent series of trustworthy actions from the organization. And so you need to make that promise that you're going to make changes, but you also need to follow that up with the action. And so think about companies like this is beyond an offensive advertisement, but companies like Nike back in the 90s when protesters exposed that in their Asian factories, there were sweatshops and child laborers and they were abusing workers and paying them next to nothing, right? And so at first, they were a little bit hesitant to admit that they were responsible for this. They didn't know what was going on, that sort of thing. But then they came out publicly and they made an acknowledgement of negligence there. And they began to rebuild trust in the brand. And today you can see that they've done things like raising the minimum wage that they pay their workers. They've improved oversight of their labor practices. They also take on a lot of social initiatives, right? Social justice types of initiatives. They don't always focus on just their products, they focus on their athletes, right? So they do a lot, they've done a lot to reestablish, I mean, it's been several years since that happened, but to reestablish trust. More recently, Chipotle, they had the E. coli outbreak. And so Chipotle was, I think, a very trustworthy company before that happened, but they lost a lot of trust when that happened. I don't know how many people were involved in that, but too many. But they did a bunch of butt kissing. They gave coupons and free meals and stuff like that at first, but they've also took out prominent ads in major publications to admit wrongdoing. They posted a video from their CEO on their Twitter page saying, here's where we went wrong and what we're going to do better. How they brought their standards up for their food safety program. So it's really about, the first step is you need to acknowledge you screwed up, right?
So acknowledgement, then action, then content.
Again, we can, yeah, exactly. And we can go back to government again. You can see why that trust is eroded there. There's not much acknowledgement of wrongdoing there, but
cool.
Yeah, it's important to go through those steps to really reform. And then you have to make sure to consistently evaluate whether or not we're living up to those standards that we've set.
All right, great. Well, I'm gonna have to. I got a couple other things to do. So, do you want to tell us a little bit about what Cyanet does, and then how they can get hold of you or find out more?
Yeah, absolutely. So at Cyanet, we do a number of things, but we use assessment in almost everything we do. So we're assessing individuals and organizations. We're trying to help organizations select and organize their talents in ways to optimize performance. We help facilitate change initiatives using those data. We identify who your influencers are within your organization, because when you're going through some sort of a change initiative, we want to make sure that we're tapping into those folks, because they can take that change initiative to greater levels, or they can tank it in a minute. So we also work with a lot of PE firms to help them select their talent and develop their talent. We offer coaching, and we also help them with human capital due diligence before they go out and invest in an organization. We want to make sure that the leaders of that organization are in the right places, and can provide guide rails in case there are some areas where we deem there's some perhaps trust issues. So.
Cool. And how they find out more?
They can get a hold of us at cyanetgroup.com. And I think, I don't know if you're posting to social media or anything. We're going to post this on our social media as well. But they can contact me directly through my LinkedIn page, just Brandon Young. I also have Twitter at Dr. Brandon Young.
All right, great. Thank you. So the tool tip of the day. So if you got bad links to your website, did you know that can affect your trust with the search engines? Which means that they could be depreciated in the rankings, sometimes not even shown in the rankings. You can get a spam score that'll show up in tools like Moz that, while this not necessarily affect directly, if something else slightly happens to your site, the compounding of both that and the bad links to your site can actually get them banned. So you have to be aware of what is the link profile to your website. That's external links pointing to you. And while you don't necessarily have control of who's linking to you, there is tools to help you identify them and then to take action to make sure they don't hurt you. The tool we use is linkresearchtools.com. It will find all the bad, nasty links. It will create the report, and it will also create what's called a detox file. A detox file is a file that you can upload to Google through the Search Console, telling them that you disavow all these bad links, that you made your best efforts to identify them, that you made the best efforts to contact them to get them removed, which the link research tools will do for you. They have a built-in little CRM to manage that process. And so then you can let Google know that you had nothing to do with that, and you did your best to try to get rid of them. They will then, over time, remove those links from your profile, discount them, and not penalize you at all. So Link Research Tool is a great tool to use for that. I think it's the best in the business. It's one of the few that actually will build a link detox profile for you. Some other shout outs. This program is on the talkradio.nyc network. And following us is Jeremiah Fox, host of the Entrepreneurial Web. He might be before us. And that's a very good podcast to go watch, but go to talkradio.nyc to find all the podcasts they have on this network. I think they're very interesting. I have another podcast called Gateway to the Smokies about my interest in the Smoky Mountains and businesses are going down there. So please follow that on Tuesdays from 6 to 7 on the same network. You can find us at this podcast on wisecontentcreateswealth.com, where you can subscribe to a newsletter that will keep you informed about who upcoming guests are for. Also have a Facebook page where this streams live as well, facebook.com/wisecontentcreateswealth. And again, my company is Galileo Tech Media. You go to galileotechmedia.com. If you need assistance with scaling up your content marketing efforts, your search engine optimization, or just having great blog posts that are smart and written for converting people into your customers, reach out to us. That's what we do. We do it on scale, and we can make sure that your SEO, your content marketing is effective. I appreciate everybody coming up here. Next week, my guest will be Dave Popple, Dr. Dave Popple, also of Cyanet Group, and we will be investigating interesting things in sociopathy and other kinds of things that affect your content. So next week, talk to you soon. Bye.